Becca, would you mind being in charge? Thank you. Okay, so we're at 5 minutes, almost 6 minutes after, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start. First of all, thank you for attending this session. I know there are a lot of other activities that are happening right now too. And I'm really excited to talk about trip planning, specifically camp planning 101. And hopefully you are all here because you either are planning an adventure or are looking to go on an adventure. And I kind of just want to start with a very basic definition of kind of like, what does it mean to go adventuring? And there are many different types of adventuring. There's what I would categorize as water adventuring, such as kayaking or scuba diving, boating. There's also air adventures, so flying, ballooning, hang gliding if we have any people that may participate in some of the more extreme sports. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is a subcategory of what I would classify as land adventuring, which includes hiking, camping, backpacking. I'm sure there's also some I've missed, like climbing. And today I will actually be focusing on the camping section of this, more specifically, how to plan a camping trip and what questions you need to address in order to start your planning, which will bring us actually to this next slide of how do you actually get started for planning a trip. I personally find that when I'm faced with a new thing to deal with or kind of look at, it kind of seems like there's so much information out there and I don't really know how to distill it and get this project started. So what I want to do is I want to break it down into hopefully some very broad questions that will narrow down to help you get maybe some of the information distilled a little bit so that way you can be better prepared to plan your own trip. So the first question that is very broad is, where do you want to go? And again, this is open-ended. So let's start by narrowing it down into something like, what activities do you enjoy? So for example, would you prefer a place where you can sit down and have a campfire and roast marshmallows? Would you prefer a place where there's lots of sun and there's good weather so that you can just relax and read in a hammock? Would you prefer somewhere that you want to see beautiful mountains and scenery? Sorry? Did somebody say something? Okay. Sorry, I got interrupted there. Do you want to see wildlife native to the area? Or do you just really want to get out and go hiking? So this can kind of help you decide kind of what activities you are looking for, and this can help narrow down exactly where you want to go in terms of campsites, places, and areas like that. And once you have a better idea of this, the next question that you are going to have to ask before you decide exactly where you want to go is, how far are you willing to travel? So California actually has many, many options for this, and this is a little bit daunting at first. But these are only the state parks in California. There are many of them. Some of them are along the coast. Some of them are more inland in the mountains. So depending on if you want that beach bonfire, if you want that hiking trail camping, there are many options. And then if you want to go to maybe one of the more manicured campgrounds, I don't know if manicured is the correct word there, but the national parks generally have very great amenities, and they are national, so they're spread out all across the United States. And if you really want to go to the specific one, it has exactly the activities you want and it has the openings. By all means, we will find you a way to get there, or I'll at least hopefully help provide the tools for maybe planning how to get there. And that will actually be one of the case studies that I will be addressing later, hopefully with your help. And specifically, we'll be looking at the Grand Teton National Park, which is in Wyoming. So let's take a step back before we go into any, I guess, specifics. Planning, packing, and preparation, the 3 Ps of planning for a trip. So the first thing that you will likely have to figure out is, after you've figured out what campsite you want to go to, how do the reservations work? So where are you going will influence this a little bit. Specifically, are you going to a state park, a national park, a private campground? Are you going on almost like BLM or open land where you don't necessarily need a reservation? So state parks and national parks generally will have a website that you can go to and reserve in advance. And depending on the site, you can reserve anywhere from 6 months in advance to a week in advance. It will really depend on that specific site. So just be aware of these options before you go. Another question to consider before you make a reservation is, who are you going with? So are you going with a significant other? Are you going with a friend group? Are you going with a family? And the reason this is important is because if you're going with one other person or a smaller group of people, then you likely will only need one campsite. However, if you're going with a friend group, sometimes you will need more than one to accommodate a second vehicle. And some campsites do offer what is called group campsites, which can actually hold, I believe it depends on the campsite, but around up to 16 people on average. And it can accommodate 2 to 4 vehicles, again, depending on the campsite. So you could maybe specifically know with your search to group campsites if you're going with a large group. And the third question that I would encourage you to consider is, how long are you going for? And this will have implications for packing, implications for, when you kind of have to, or how far out you have to plan your trip in advance. So you're going for days, in that case, you might not even need a reservation, or you're going for weeks, and in that case, you likely would. Okay, so there are many different categories that I would consider for packing. These being the campsite equipment, kitchen equipment, the clothing you want to bring, anything you will need for health or accessibility, hygiene, the tools that you might need to bring with you, depending on if you're going RV camping or tent camping, or if you're going for something like even car camping. And then the documents that you should probably bring with you, just to make sure that you have credit cards, etc. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. And I should also note that before I move on, the campsite, the kitchen, and some of the tools are often available for rent. I know that the Caltech Y has kitchen and campsite gear, and we will sometimes provide tools depending on exactly what you need. And Rebecca, I just saw, has posted in the chat the Caltech Y website where you can find more extensive information on this. And so if you don't want to make an investment upfront for some of these items that we're going to be discussing, you don't have to. We can make it at least financially accessible for you to some degree. So there you go. Sorry. So this is where I want to start making it a little bit interactive, and feel free to type in the chat or speak up. And just some of the things that you see in this campsite that you might want to bring along if this were to be your campsite that you were planning on going to. So what is some of the equipment that you see here that you think would be essential for you to go for this? So I'll start off just for a little bit. Oh yeah, I actually do see some people in here in the chat. So there's a tent. It's definitely very true. You have camping chairs, sleeping bags, a mattress or a mattress pad. Yeah, so, and these are just some more of them that I've seen. A pillow, camp chairs, as somebody pointed out, a lantern actually for at night, so you can hang an electric lantern, I should specify. We're not going to try to start fires. Just you can hang from your, like the tie from the top of your tent or somewhere in your tent so you can find things at night. A clothesline, which is not actually featured here, but if you're staying for an extended amount of time, I would highly recommend it because things just do get wet. And then the tent. Okay, so I have just shown, or I just show a generic camp stove here for an example of what you can do. You do not need anything this fancy. Anything that is reusable, easily washable, won't get broken easily, will work just as fine. Sometimes I would even argue you don't necessarily need a camp stove. You could do something over a campfire. Sorry, 1 second. There you go. So you have a stove and fuel if you choose to have a stove and fuel, or if you're going in an RV or a trailer, then you would have access to a more extensive kitchen than this. Any cookware you might need, anything you want to eat out of or eat with. If you aren't going in somewhere that has refrigeration, I would highly recommend bringing a cooler with some ice, soap for washing your dishes, and trash bags and a camp sink are some other things that you could consider. But Rebecca recommends a spork, so for an eating utensil for this, and I will second that as well. They're very helpful. So what are examples of clothing? So this is actually one that will vary a lot depending on where you are going. So if you're going somewhere that has great weather at that time of year, then you might not need all of this rain gear, such as some of the stuff pictured here. So I just have a general list of some things here that we could bring, such as undergarments. You'll need a couple pair of t-shirts, shorts, pants, sandals and water shoes, hiking, sleepwear. I would recommend a hat no matter where you go, just because a lot of times you'll need to get out of the sun to some degree, or maybe you just have general things flying at your face when you're hiking, etc. And then sunglasses. And if you do choose to go somewhere that is colder, or you want to go on a skiing trip out in the snow or something like that, do be sure to bring, the thermals for underneath your clothing and any rainy weather gear that you might need. And so here is some examples of a health kit. I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker just because everybody's health will vary a lot depending on person, especially if you have additional accessibility needs. And I do want to be inclusive in that. General things that I would recommend: a first aid kit, medications, the toiletries that you need, and a towel. And again, this is not an extensive list. There are more things that you are free to bring. But this is just a kind of general idea of, oh, I could bring this, or do I need this for camping for a day? And tools, I think the most important on here are probably the rope and the cord, and then an axe or a hatchet. And then if you are going into bear country, a bear barrel and spray if bear cans or bear storage is not available on your campsite. And this rope and cord can be used for a clothesline, so then you don't have to bring another clothesline. It could be used to tie up a hammock, tie up food for anything you might need. And then the axe or the hatchet, and this is something that I actually had somebody request that I bring up. If you are going to a campsite where you can collect your own firewood, or I guess if you are going to a campsite where a fire is allowed, please do not bring your own firewood. It will introduce, or it has the potential to introduce, non-native species into the environment that can be very harmful. So a lot of campsites will allow you to pick up or kind of like chop apart dead wood. So that's why an axe or a hatchet is very important to have, just because you can often go around finding firewood for very low cost or free, but you do have to get it locally from the area. And then again, burn everything within the very marked grounds if you do want to start a fire. And yes, you can also purchase it locally at stores or ranger stations, but do make sure it's just from the area. Okay, and then I guess most important for you personally, make sure to have a passport, ID card, and copies of them just in case one gets lost, so you can easily replace it on the way back home. Credit cards, cash, or cell phone, which I assume most people will bring anyway, and then a campsite reservation printed out if it's required. So I have thrown a lot of information about this at you guys. So I'm going to kind of switch gears and go a little bit into meal planning. So this is how you plan the reservations and the packing. But the meal plan is something that you have a little bit more flexibility with. So just some general advice for meal planning. If you are camping for many days, which will be this example that I'll show here in a second, then you probably are going to have very highly active days. And I recommend protein in the morning, to bring lots of snack food in general, pick foods that can be frozen or are shelf stable, canned, etc. And don't be afraid to mix and match food, and save your most complicated meal for dinner, because that's often when you'll have the most time after you've wound down from camping and stuff like that. So this is an example of almost weekly meal plan. And I have a Costco membership, so I went to Costco and I bought egg whites, bread, granola, a summer sausage, block of cheese, a bunch of snacks, and then some prepackaged quinoa, and then some vegetables that would stay good for longer. And this is what I made for day one. Day two, day three, all the way up to day 6. And you can kind of get the idea. Oops, sorry. Oh no. Sorry, I went forward on that a little bit too much. Stop there. Okay. So as you can see, there's a lot of repetition on this. I am very obviously plan this for somebody who does not have any dietary restrictions. If you do, there are great resources. I don't have the link on me right now, but I can drop it in the chat later on when Rebecca talks about or talks a little bit later. But there is a very great vegan and vegetarian camp meal planning guide, and I feel that it would be disingenuous to just post it up here as my work. So this is for somebody who, first of all, likes eggs a lot, is not afraid to eat the same thing every day for lunch, and can kind of mix and match dinners. So this is just an example, but you generally do expect, at least if you're going for an extended stay, to eat the same thing multiple days in a row. And yeah, that's kind of that. So this is the case study I have. I don't know how long this will take, but I want to pose a question to you of, you are going on a trip to the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. And you want to kind of figure out, okay, how do I start planning this trip? Where do I get there? So I post each of you in this presentation, or that are attending here today, kind of to search for these things. And Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and post that link we discussed earlier, be greatly appreciated. So if everybody could please follow this link. This is a link to the Grand Teton National Park. This was to hope to make this a little bit easier. But what campsites are available for this national park if you decide to visit this national park? And please feel free to speak up or just put it in the chat and I will get to it as they pop up. I believe there should be something on this website. So if you just search campground with Control F, you should see a bunch of them. So one suggestion is Jenny Lake. Another person has Signal Mountain. Signal Mountain we'll actually discuss in a little bit more detail, because that's actually where I planned a trip 6 months ago. So I'll have plenty of pictures to show from there. Okay, So I unfortunately can't navigate away from this, but there is Jenny Lake, there's Signal Mountain. There are a couple of more that are in that area. There should be a map on the general website that you can follow. And yeah, we'll go on to answer the next question, I guess, at this point. So how long can you stay? This will vary depending on the campsite. So I believe Signal Mountain has 81 campsites, and it will actually list the amenities on that page that was sent out to the chat. And you can opt to see how reservations are made, how far in advance you can make them, what sites are tent sites, what sites can accommodate an electric hookup. So if you are going in an RV or a trailer, then you can have electricity as long as you're staying in one of those sites. And they'll often usually have restrictions for how long your trailer can be and everything like that. So all of the information should be on those websites or the links that website goes to. So that's why it was important that you at least saw an idea of how you could start planning that. Another large question to ask is, how are you going to get there? So for example, Wyoming is about anywhere from a 17 to a 20-hour drive. So if you're driving by car, you do want to split it up into days. So you might have to get an Airbnb to stay in between on some of those days, or you could camp on BLM land, which is free for an evening. Another thing that I think is often overlooked is, what is the weather going to be like on the dates that you plan to be there? And your meal plan, something similar to what we discussed previously, just have that out, have all of your food for that. And then what activities do you want to do? So this is actually something that I'll be showing a little bit later. So say that we've gone through all of these steps and we have our campsite booked, we have the reservation, we have our transportation, we've packed accordingly, and now we're ready to start planning these activities. And I highly recommend, if you are an avid hiker, to get the app called All Trails. I'll post it in the chat right now for those who don't have it. And this has a lot of hikes that are local to the area, depending on where you are, and you can often plan how far, how hard you want this hike to be, etc. And once you have all your activities planned and you're packed up in the car, you go, then what do you do when you get there? So that's what I'm hoping to show here. So I actually went on a trip to Signal Lake Mountain. I believe it was 6 or 7 months ago. And we stayed at Signal Mountain Campground, which is one of the campgrounds that was mentioned in the first kind of like case study slide. And when we went, it was actually a first come, first served basis for these campgrounds. It's been updated to take reservations. But when we went there, we had to arrive at the campground at 5 a.m. in the morning in order to secure a campsite. So that is definitely something to keep in mind if you don't have a reservation in advance. And we were lucky enough that we got this campsite in the bottom left here. So this is actually the tent we used and a hammock. And we actually had a trail in the back here that led down to this beautiful lake here, which is Jackson Lake. But all of the campgrounds, including this one, I think this is site 15. I think we were site 61 or something like that. And they all have this gorgeous layer of trees and brush, and there's a lake very close nearby. Some of the amenities for this campground were, we had cell phone reception, which is not something that you can necessarily take for granted. We didn't have internet connectivity if you go to the lodge or the local ranger store. Let's see what else. Trash recycling. They did have food storage lockers because there are bears in the area. So we knew that even though we brought a bear barrel just in case, we did have access to for storage. And there was stuff on site, there's portable water, there's laundry facilities if you needed it. So if you wanted to pack a smaller amount of clothing and then wash them, you could do that too. They also had flush toilets, and they do have coin operated showers. So showers, flush toilets are not necessarily things that you can take for granted at a campsite. And again, it will vary. So this is kind of setting up on Signal Mountain. And then some of the activities we did throughout the week were we actually went out, and this is a little bit outside of the national park itself, but we went out and found some buffalo, and there'll be cars driving through here too. But one of these buffalo will basically plop to the ground and start rolling around in the dirt. So it's this one right here. Yeah, so that was pretty fun to see, because there's this giant animal in front of you and then just falls over and starts rolling around. And we were also there in the middle of a wildflower bloom. So we saw gorgeous fields of wildflowers on a lot of our hikes. This is myself and my partner who I went with. And this is just one representative picture, but there were so many like this that I could have shown. The mountains had a little bit of snow on them, so all the water was flowing down the mountains and rivers, and it fed into lakes such as this lake right here. This is actually the beach that our campsite led down onto, and we could just come out here and swim in the water. It was very cold though, so if you are somebody who really enjoys swimming, make sure that you choose a place that maybe isn't legitimately 34 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Yeah, this is just an example of things you can do there. Obviously, it's not all inclusive. And then we have proof of concept in that you don't necessarily need a kitchen stove to cook all your meals. So this is a campfire ring that was provided by the campground itself. So this is something that's already on your campsite. You don't have to do anything extra to get this. You put this grill over, and we actually did invest in some very nice metal skewers, and we just popped them down on the fire, and then we had everything we could need, and we even had extra for the little wildlife chipmunks that really liked our food. We did not actually let them eat our food. They would always, come around when we were eating because they're looking for food. So yeah, so that is my adventure, kind of a case study of kind of how you would plan something if you were going far away. However, if Wyoming is too far for you to travel and you just think I'm absolutely crazy, first of all, you're not incorrect. And second of all, there are places to go nearby, and Rebecca is actually here to walk you through some of these. So I'll let her take over from here.
Thank you, Camille. So I'm jealous. I really want to go to the Tetons. One more. There we go. But if we're looking at things that you could reasonably do in a weekend, or maybe if you wanted to do a long weekend, I have a couple suggestions. And one of them is Death Valley, land of the minerals. So Death Valley is about 4 to 5 hours away from Caltech, depending on traffic and depending where in the park you want to go. But where a lot of the campsites are is somewhere between 4 and 5 hours drive away. So actually the last time I went to Death Valley, I did it as a very last minute trip. Decided Friday night, that's what we were gonna do. We woke up early Saturday morning, drove, got there around lunchtime, spent the day out at Badwater Basin looking at the salt flats, kind of hiking through some of the different canyons and gulches, and then just slept in my car. There's a lot of first come, first serve campsites at Death Valley. To be honest, it's more of a parking lot with very large parking spaces. But there is also some campsites and things like that. They do fill up, and there is options for reservation in terms of campsite if you want something with a ring, like a fire pit, and it's a little bit more of a traditional campsite. But there is kind of a really nice option that if you're just sleeping in your car, you can do pretty easily. A couple things to note about Death Valley in particular is that there's not a lot of services in or near Death Valley. So when I go to Death Valley, I try to pack all of the food that I'm going to need. I oftentimes stick with things that are either more canned or kind of more of even backpacking style food, so that I don't have to necessarily bring a huge amount of coolers or a large amount of storage of stuff that could go bad. There is a kind of convenience area store, and there is a gas station in one portion of it, but there's not a lot. So if you need stuff, you can certainly get it, but I recommend really planning in advance both your meals and also when you're when you're going to get gas, and make sure you don't run out of gas as you're driving down to one of the more remote parts of Death Valley. The next one that I'm going to talk about is Joshua Tree. So Joshua Tree is actually really, really common for us to do with the Caltech Y as a camping trip. So up in the upper right is actually a picture of the last time we went out to Joshua Tree as a group. It's about 2-hour drive to most of the campsites. Again, it depends a little bit on traffic. And this is one that you could easily do as a weekend, but some people even go and just do it as, you know, a midweek, gonna take a day off work kind of type trip. And they have desert blooms. They have lots of really great rocks. I think the best quote I ever heard when I was in Joshua Tree was a young boy who said, "Why do they call it Joshua Tree? I think they should call it the Great Rocks to Climb on National Park." It's much more descriptive. So I think a lot of people go there to climb, but also just you can scramble and enjoy the rocks. And most of the campsites there are reservations. So for Joshua Tree, I do recommend reserving in advance. Jumbo Rocks is my favorite campground because you get to be among those big rocks. And pretty much all of them have fire pits. Usually bathrooms are sometimes flush, sometimes vault, which means just hole in the ground. But there are water and fill stations. So there will be opportunities to fill up your water at some of the campsites, but there's not a ton of water fill stations in Joshua Tree. So it's another place where you want to be very conscientious of your water and how much water you're bringing in and how much volume you have to store that water. And then on the lower right there is actually a picture of some Caltech Y camping kit that we kind of used to make what's one of my favorite camping meals, which is essentially they're like burrito bowls, and so they're black beans with some taco seasoning, some cheese, corn, tortillas. You can kind of throw in whatever else you want into the mix, but I always find them really yummy, and you just kind of heat it up over a campfire. So Joshua Tree is a really common place. It and Death Valley are really great for seeing stars as well. So they're really gorgeous places if you want to kind of camp out to see some stars and see the Milky Way. So the last set that I'll say is actually right in our own backyard. So we have both the Angeles National Forest and the San Bernardino National Forest. There's campgrounds that are literally 15 minutes away from campus. So if you want just to get very, very kind of quick and out into the trees, there's things like Millard Campground. If you go up further into the mountains, there's other campgrounds like Buckhorn, Chileo. You can go up to Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead, San Gorgonio, all of those areas. On the National Forest website, they list out all the campsites. They have all that information about, are they first come, first served? Do you need a reservation? How much they cost? When are they open? How many sites they have? All of that information is on those National Forest websites. And so I have the links there, and I'll send them out afterwards as well. But one of the things that is important to think about is on those links, they'll say trail camp. A trail camp is a camp that you would backpack into, as opposed to when you would drive up and have an established campsite at. So just be aware of that when you're looking, that trail camp is more for backpacking, whereas the campsites or the campgrounds are the more established, built up camping areas. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the picture up there, as Camille noted, is a bear box. And so that is where you would store all of your smelly stuff. And when I say smelly stuff, I mean that includes your things like medications, soap, deodorant. You want anything that a bear would go, ooh, that smells different and interesting, because you don't want the bear to think that your tent is something interesting to investigate. There's not necessarily a large amount of bear sightings or bear encounters in the area, but it's always better to be safe. And so if that is present at your site, definitely use that. But it's always good to check beforehand if you're in an area that recommends having some storage for bear, whether that's they offer bear boxes or if you need to bring a bear barrel. And the Caltech Y does have bear barrels as well that you can rent. So that's my quick, brief little, some of my favorite places to go camping in the nearby area. And so I want to open it up now to any questions you guys have, either about the process of planning, camping in the area, stories that you want to share, whatever it is. Now is the time to answer those questions. So thank you for listening. I'll stop the recording.